can do a roll call. Okay. Alyssa.
Present.
Jonathan.
Here.
Lindsay. Tasha.
Here.
Lindy. Nolan.
Here.
Carla. Jimmy. All right, looks like you have 1, 2, 3, 4 members present. I think Carla will be joining us, so I think, Madam Chair, if you'd like to go ahead and proceed, we'll do that.
Yeah, if everybody's had a chance to review the agenda, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve.
So moved. This is Nolan.
Great. I forget. I think we need a second. Do we need a second on that?
Seconded. This is Jonathan.
All right. Since we don't have any action items, move ahead to the informational reports. Can we hear from the assembly? I think Assembly Member LaFrance is on.
Hi. Yes, I'm here today.
Hi. Do you want to take it away for report?
Sure. And you know, it feels like we just met a couple weeks ago. You guys had a special meeting. Is that correct? And I was just going over my notes, and I didn't want to necessarily repeat what we covered last time, but I can hit a few things. And if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to go into greater detail. So for a while, just on, you know, the most of the feedback we've been getting from members of the public and folks has to do with extending the emergency declaration to January 15th, and then the new emergency orders by the acting mayor. So, you know, we've been getting feedback from members of the public and with questions too about the emergency orders. And one thing that I thought was interesting that some of you may have seen is the survey that was conducted by UAA that provided some feedback and response from community members that showed, like, for example, and this is from a phone survey of Anchorage residents between November 5th and 7th, that 67% support additional mandates and 58% are willing to get a COVID-19 vaccine if it were available. And at the time, it said 70% of folks are not likely to attend or host a Thanksgiving celebration. 73% did not shake hands with someone. 82% wear a mask most or all of the time when not at home. And 62% have gotten or plan to get their flu shot this winter. So I thought that this information was helpful to get a broader view of perspectives, because sometimes, you know, we tend to hear back mostly from certain segments of folks. I think last time we talked about the vacancy in the office of mayor, and that a effort to have a special election failed, and there was also an ordinance that was brought forward to seat a mayor elected in the regular election earlier than July 1st, and that failed as well. I expect that after we get out of the height of this pandemic and after the regular election, we'll be having a larger community discussion about the charter, and there may be some proposed changes. I know some of the feedback I've received from community members, for example, has to do with when there's an acting mayor, since according to charter section, I think 7.01 or so, it's either 701 or 702, where it defines what is a vacancy. And so when an assembly member moves into the role of acting member, that's not considered a vacancy. So we don't appoint a temporary assembly member for that. And so, for example, one suggestion has been, you know, to have a, pardon me, discussion about when there's an acting mayor, maybe we ought to still have someone appointed temporarily to fill in for that seat that isn't vacated because the acting mayor is officially the chair of the assembly, but still there have been concerns about representation for constituents in that district. So that's one example. I think you all know the budget was passed on November 17th, and with all the time you spent on the budget, I won't go into those details. I know that at community councils, gotten very positive feedback about the 230 million that was deposited into the MOA trust because of due to the ML&P sale, and how that will spin off revenue to pay for costs of government services, as well as adding e-cigarettes and vaping devices to the excise tax, tobacco excise tax, and how that will provide around $800,000, right, or so of relief tax for property taxes to pay for general government services. And then I would just conclude with a couple things. You know, we've had discussions about metrics and guidelines concerning COVID-19. I mean, going back to the emergency orders, and if there's a way to come up with a framework to provide maybe some more certainty, if you can. Like, for example, some communities, when the positivity rate and hospital capacity gets to a certain point, then automatically certain things happen, whether that's shutting down in-person, excuse me, dining at restaurants or bars, or, you know, putting a 25% limit on retail spaces. So there's some conversation about, you know, what would be appropriate metrics or guidelines for that. And then, of course, and I see there are folks from the school district here, you know, there's a lot of interest and conversation about ASD's school reopening plan. And we do have a quarterly joint meeting between the assembly and the school board this coming Monday, December 7th, from 5 to 7 p.m. And we have these joint meetings because we are, they're required per the charter. And we actually last year updated the agenda because the charter specifies that we need to meet at least 4 times yearly in a public session to coordinate financial planning, capital improvement needs, the comprehensive plan, and other matters of mutual concern. So that's what starts off the agenda. And I know that ASD is planning to do a back to school update at that meeting. And there will also be a discussion of the COVID-19 vaccination plan, along with other issues. So thank you so much for allowing me time to provide an update, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. We greatly appreciate it. I want to open the floor to any questions from the commission. All right, hearing none, I do have a question about the kind of automatic triggers that you'd mentioned that have come up from the public, and people are interested in potentially having the assembly be able to provide some, you know, some measure of kind of assurance that, you know, when we reach certain metrics, X will happen. Mm-hmm. Can you give us any additional information on what those might look like, or at least let us know kind of where they're being discussed and how people might be able to give input?
Yeah, that is a new topic in terms of, I don't think there's been any formal discussion, Alyssa, on that yet. And as I envision it, that's something, for example, that'll come up in community councils that I'll mention, that, you know, that there are some folks in the administration and on the assembly who have been thinking about or talking about possibility coming up with a framework for those kinds of triggers. But that's about as far as it's gotten. I don't know if, you know, that's something the administration has been working on, but we definitely haven't talked about it in any formal way on the assembly. But I'll keep that in mind if we, you know, it could come up like in a rules committee meeting. That's kind of where we can talk about just general stuff. But right now, there aren't any formal plans for any kind of structured discussion.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay.
But
just
if
getting
any of
another-
you ever have any feedback, you all are very thoughtful and data-driven folks. So, do please feel free to, shoot me an email with anything on that topic or any others. I really appreciate it. And thanks for all the work you do.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the assembly, or I'm sorry, the school district presentation. Andy and Jim.
Okay, Lila, I'll go ahead and share screen. 1 second.
Alyssa and Jim, while we're doing that, I just want for the record to let you guys know that Jimmy had joined us as soon as Assemblymember LaFrance, and I don't know if Carla or other members had joined us.
I'm here.
Please let
This
us
is
know.
Carla.
Thank you, Carla. And then again, Jim, for the record, just state your name and Andy if he's going to speak as well on these matters, just so that we know who's talking. Thank you. We can see, but if people want to listen in, it's good to know who's speaking. Carry it away. Thank you, Jim.
Of course. I'm Jim Anderson. I'm the CFO for Anchorage School District. Andy Ratliff's the Senior Director for the Office of Management and Budget, and we'll both be talking to you today about the pro forma we briefed to the school board Tuesday night. So the pro forma is something we do every year in December. And basically, if you project students are going to be less next year or more next year, we do go ahead and take that into account in terms of the numbers of metric space staff. But otherwise, the pro forma is designed to give the school board a snapshot in time. If everything were to look the same next year, all of the same programs we have this year, everything else, it gives them our projected deficit, which you will see in the next few minutes is pretty high for next year. The board will give us their final guidance for budget development at the next school board meeting. And then in the month of January, Andy and I and the rest of the administrative staff develop the preliminary budget that we'll present to the board. There may or may not be modifications, but it is due by charter to the assembly no later than the first Monday in March. So the board will approve it in February. We'll give it to the assembly, and then it gets approved at some point during the month of March. So go real quick to, we won't spend a lot of time on agenda. You'll see that we'll cover the general fund budget gap, and we'll also cover the transportation fund budget gap. And it looks like it's a lot of detail. It's actually a 30,000 foot view. And of course, we'll be able to answer any questions you have. There's a lot of assumptions made. We'll try to cover those assumptions as we go through the brief. And again, it's just to provide a preliminary budget gap. There's a lot of things that could change even between now and January, to include another round of stimulus money and other things that may affect the way that we actually develop the preliminary budget. But right now, we just go by common law. Andy, I'll hand it off.
Let's see here. Okay, so you guys will probably recognize this slide. We've shown this before. It's really how we go from the OASIS count in October, which counts our students for state funding and turns it into an adjusted average daily membership, or ADM, that the state uses to distribute state aid. For this year, for FY21, we did trigger the hold harmless clause that is in state statute, which says if your school size adjusted ADM goes below 5% from the prior year, from FY20, then we get to add back 75% of the difference between FY20 and FY21. This is a 3-year program where the hold harmless is in effect for 3 years. For the next year, for FY22, it's 50% of the difference between FY20 and FY22, so long as you're any amount below FY20's school size adjusted ADM. So you don't have to continue to be 5% below. As long as you're below, you get something added back. And you'll see that a little later on when we go through the actual calculations. This is just kind of the more simplistic view to see how that ADM, the student count, rolls up into an adjusted ADM for funding purposes. But it really is the school size adjustment, which is taken individually for each school. And it's based on the fewer students you have in a school, the more money you get, or more of a ADM adjustment you get per student. And then it's aggregated up at the district level, and that aggregation is what's used in the state formula or the comparison from the prior year to determine if you meet the hold harmless provision. The district cost factor is added on, which is 0 for Anchorage, and then the special needs up 20%. CTE factor 1.5%, intensive needs, which is 13 times each intensive needs student, and then correspondence students, which are 90% of the overall correspondence ADM count.
And for those who don't live in the K12 education world, if you look at the number on the far left at the bottom, the 42,863, that's the average daily membership number that we project to come out of next October. And it's during the first 20 days in October is the OASIS count. And then as it goes through those factors, all the way on the far right, you'll see the 75,000 plus. That's the adjusted average daily membership. That gets multiplied times the base student allocation, which hasn't changed in years in Alaska, of $5,930. And then there's some other steps in the formula, but this is how the state looks at K-12 funding.
Right, and then looking further out for FY23, the percentage goes from 50% down to 25%, and then it's phased out completely in FY24. The other thing to note is we can only have one hold harmless adjustment to be taken in any given year. So as you might recall, we did have a hold harmless for consolidating Mount Spur into a couple different elementary schools on base. So that adjustment goes away because this one's certainly more valuable than that was. Although the Mount Spur adjustment was expected to be near 0 for FY22 anyway, so it's not that big of a deal for us. So this slide is the same as the picture slide before it, essentially, but it has the comparative information of what we adopted in FY21 versus the actual OASIS count in FY21 versus FY22, what we're projecting. So the amounts in the red box, the ADM change is going to reference the projections for FY22 versus the adopted budget for FY21. So the third column minus the first column. So we're projecting a little under 1,200 students lower than what we originally projected in FY21, which was done last January pre-COVID. So a lot of things have changed since then, but we expect to gain some of the students that we've lost. We lost about 5,500 regular ADM from what we had projected to go, and those students goes predominantly to private schools and correspondence schools, as far as we know. We expect a lot of those to come back, assuming we open back in person next August. The same with our correspondence change. We expect that to go up still by about almost 1,300 above what we had projected. We're about 1,675 above what we actually projected for this year. And some of our correspondence schools are saying they expect to go down a little bit just based on folks returning back to in-classroom instruction. But they're pretty optimistic that they'll be able to retain most of the students they've picked up or pick up more students from the other statewide correspondence schools like IDEA, Raven, Cyberlinks. The other thing to note, this hold harmless provision right under the school size adjustment, that's where we calculate out how much the school size adjustment actually has, where it actually benefits us. So this is the school size adjusted number of 48,218 minus the FY20 number, which is not on here, but it was 49,275, and then multiply that by 50%. The other thing to note would be the intensive needs change, which is we expect it to be about where it was on the FY20. So we added some in FY21 because our intensive needs students had kept growing and growing and growing, predominantly through earlier identification in pre-K. This year we got pretty far behind because we couldn't actually meet with those students face to face, so we couldn't identify the students. And then a lot of these students are medically fragile, so getting time to evaluate those students was a challenge this year. So our numbers did go down, but we expect as potentially a vaccine comes out and people feel more safe, they'll be coming back into the district. So we take our total district adjusted ADM comes out to about a little over 75,000. And then that's multiplied by the BSA, the $5,930 per student or per adjusted ADM to get a basic need of what the state says is needed to fund education. They then take off the required local effort or the property taxes, which is 2.65 mils of the property value. As you can see, it's jumping up from 107.9 million in FY21, our adopted budget, to about over 112 million. If you look down to the property values, it's based on our property values for the second preceding year. So the 42.3 million in FY22's projection is based on the 2020 property values. And you can see there's a little over a 4% jump from property values in FY21 or it would have been calendar year 2019 to calendar year 2020. So it's really causing a pretty significant jump in the required local effort, and then it reduces state funding dollar for dollar by the amount that we increase the required local effort. Then the state takes off some money for the federal impact aid, which is money that the federal government passes through to us to support predominantly on-base students or lands that we can't tax to make up for that difference. We get about $15 or $16 million from federal impact aid, and the state takes a little less than half of that. So we do expect state revenue to go down considerably, predominantly because of the required local effort going down and a little bit on the enrollment changes. And then our total local contribution is expected to go up because of that required local contribution as well.
And just as a sidebar, the state has looked at it for the last several years. We expect the governor's office will be looking at changing from 2.6 mils to 4 mils again, potentially as part of his budgetary efforts to get the state in line with their reduced revenue as well. So I'm sure Lance will be following that closely along with Alex. We certainly will at the beginning of the legislative session, which is the third Thursday or the third Tuesday in January. So I think the governor's budget is still projected to be released on December 15th. So I'm sure quite a few of us will be looking at what that impact could be if it made it through the legislative session as proposed during the springtime. So future discussion.
Yeah, and the other thing to note too is kind of downstream of this, the district has asked for property taxes to support the deficit in the transportation program. But with this increase in the required local effort, we are going to be up against the municipal tax cap, not just the state, but the municipal tax cap will limit the amount that we can collect to support our transportation program. So you'll see that a little later on, but this is really the driving factor in why that's going to be limited this year as opposed to previous years. So this is our slide that just shows our general fund revenue versus our adopted 21 versus our projected FY22 revenue. You can see the property taxes going up by about 4.1 million just due to that required local effort going up. And then whenever we produce this, we don't ever really talk about or put in a usage of fund balance. For this year, we've used 8.3 million in our fund balance to support ongoing operations, to retain staff, ignite teachers, things like that. But we do expect that to we don't really expect to have a lot of fund balance remaining after FY21 is over, just due to the decline in enrollment for this year and the increased costs due to COVID. It's going to be a pretty rough year for us, and we don't expect to have a lot of fund balance to put towards the FY22 deficit. So we leave that at 0 for FY22. You can see the state foundation funding going down by about 5.7 million, or about 1.7%. And then the other one thing to note on here is the federal impact aid. While it's not materially different than FY21's projection, it certainly could have been. Congress has passed a federal impact aid coronavirus relief bill that allowed districts to use their FY20 ADM counts as the basis for revenue rather than their FY21 counts, which normally is used would have been used for FY22. So since our enrollment was lower, and particularly on base, our enrollment was lower, that accounted for about $3 million in revenue that would have been lost had we used our FY21 numbers or student counts to fund FY22. So that was a pretty big boon for the district to keep that, to kind of keep that afloat, or that line item intact. So our preliminary expenditures, as Jim said, this is how what our expenditures would be to keep our staffing metrics the same. We adjust it for enrollment by how many special education students we have, classroom students, correspondence students, things like that. And we kind of go off, and here's like the local, we adjust from the enrollment and then adjust for contractual obligations. The biggest thing to note here is we have 6 union contracts that are still in various stages of negotiations that haven't been settled for FY22, which represents the vast majority of all our employees in the district, really, because it's teachers, principals, and support staff in the district, food service, bus, although all these groups that are fairly large in volume and dollars haven't been settled, so we don't really know where that's going to land. We didn't include any sort of COLA adjustments in here. We just included step movement that's generally accepted in all their contracts. So we did include that, but not any sort of cost of living or other adjustments. We did fund some positions from our CARES Act money. You probably know we went to a 1-to-1 student to device ratio, and we had 17.5 FTE for our IT techs to support that program, paid for out of CARES Act money for this year, as well as almost 30 FTE for health teachers that were paid out of the CARES Act. So this model does bring those back into the general fund, and as well as some other COVID costs that were outside of the normal budget, like virtual school software and PPE, things like that. So then we anticipate bringing all salaries, wages, and then the benefits should be aligned pretty well with what our contractual increases are. We don't see anything that's going to be really outside of the norm, or outside of just a varying percentage of what's included in the contracts. For services, supplies, and equipment, our heat, electric, and telecom are anticipated to change. Our heat preliminarily is gone. Our usage has gone up this year, and I'm not quite sure if it's just due to more or not having students in the building creating their own heat, or more air exchanges per hour from outside air to kind of make the air a little cleaner. And then we have some increased telecom costs that are associated with our 1-to-1 plan for low-income students to be able to access internet from home. The instructional software, as I mentioned, that's about $2.7 million that we put into the virtual learning program. And then student allotments, with the 1,600 increase in correspondence students, so comes the student allotments. So that's I think that was 5.8 or so million dollars of increased amounts to families to provide their own students' education. And then our liability insurance continues to climb. Has been about 10, 20, 30% per year for the last several years, as nationwide trends in sexual abuse claims, traumatic head injury, and now layering on top some of these concerns around COVID will generate considerable increases for next year as well, is what our broker's telling us. Hopefully we get a better estimate than what we have now once come January, before we can finalize our budget. So this is our general fund FTE by state function, and this takes into account all the metrics driven staffing that are for classroom instruction, special education, principals, counselors, all those things. This is the net of all those changes, bringing all the staff in from the CARES Act and all the staff that's going to get increased in correspondence program and decreased in neighborhood programs. Overall, the net is only about a 7 FTE reduction, just purely based on the metrics and continuing to keep staffing the same as it is now. In terms of dollars by state function, this shows really the contractual obligations that we have with step movement or whatever's been settled within these functions. Like you can see, option maintenance has a higher percentage than the other ones, and that's because the custodians and maintenance contracts have been settled, but all the other ones have not. Down here in the yellow, you can see the cost of the staff that we're adding from the CARES Act and the cost of the staff that's going down in the metrics based. I think it's kind of important to note, we're estimating about a $5 to $10 million increase in cost associated with those unsettled contracts, but we don't have that included in here in these projections by each function, aside from like a footnote within the memo. So this shows our preliminary budget gap of about 25.3 million without the unsettled contracts included, which could be again $5–10 million range. You can see the contracted services. That's where we discussed the software, the student allotments, and the utilities. So that's the biggest increase there. And then the supplies increased as well. And that's essentially for the most part, it's going to be Chromebooks to maintain our one-to-one device to student program there. So that's our general fund. It's about 25.3 million. That's a pretty steep climb to make up. And then we'll add on to that the People Transportation Fund. We'll go over the revenue, which is almost entirely state funded with some local taxes now, and the expenditures, which really aren't expected to change significantly from the current year. So here's a transportation budget gap. You can see about $1.4 million less in property taxes, and that's because, as I mentioned earlier, we're butting up to the city tax cap. That, as you might know, the school district calculates their portion of the tax cap independently from the school or from the city to see here's how much the district can receive. We didn't include any fund balance for the transportation fund. Again, we lost a couple $1 million in revenue from the loss of students in the transportation fund this year. So we're not certain if there's going to be money available in this fund to support ongoing operations after the current year. Our state transportation revenue is going to be going down by about $750,000. We get paid, I think it's $483 per regular ADM. So it's not on the adjusted ADM basis, it's on the regular ADM, and does not include correspondence students. So it's just the neighborhood programs that generate this money. So overall, we're looking at about a $2.8 million budget gap for transportation, for a total of a little over 28 million between transportation and general fund. And then layer on $5 to $10 million of unsettled contracts, you're potentially up to $38 million in total budget gap.
So the district spends about 88–89% of all of our revenue goes toward people. So when we look at a 28 to 35 plus $1 million budget gap, there aren't a lot of ways. We can't not have insurance. We can't not pay workers' comp and healthcare costs and everything else. So by and large, as we look at that gap, we look at personnel within the district. This slide is just to show a representation of where our money goes. If you look at the bars that go left to right, you can see the scale on the bottom, that's in millions. So teachers is roughly $340 million, $340 million per year. And then you work up to the school board, which is really, really small. I put the FTEs just so you can have an idea of the scale and scope. By and large, with the exception of the school board, the exempt, maintenance, pretty much in some ACE positions that aren't directly in a building, the vast majority of the district's personnel are either operating inside a school building or are supporting the school building to even open or close every day, i.e. for maintenance and transportation. So it's certainly difficult for the school board. It's difficult for the administration when you're looking at this kind of budget gap. Every year we have groups of people that consider their one program the most important, the heart and soul of the district, and the school board really struggles with and we're all going to struggle this year knowing that we're not going to be able to have everything look the same. So I started the first slide was saying the pro forma shows the budget gap. If everything were to look the same, it's certainly not going to look the same next year. This will be the first time since Dr. Bishop has come on board that there's really no rosy outlook on how to make everything kind of look the same next year. The one piece missing from the discussion today that COVID has also impacted is student nutrition. It's not part of the general fund. All of the money comes from USDA, but their deficit just in the first semester, because we haven't been having children going into the schools and collecting meals every day and eating them. We've been serving students, but we're serving them very inefficiently. So we're only getting about 10% of the normal meals distributed throughout the district at dozens of feeding sites. But we may have 4 or 5 people at an elementary school feeding site where on a normal year there would be 1. So it's very expensive. And again, a $6 to $7 million deficit in this semester. We'll come back and we'll have to address that as well this spring. The quicker we can get schools opened and kids can start eating again, the quicker we can reduce the impact for the second semester. But there are certainly many impacts across the district due to COVID that the normal citizen wouldn't expect or even think about. So when Andy said we don't expect to have a lot of fund balance left, there are a number of reasons why. The direct COVID costs and then those incidental costs that are hitting us as a result of the way we're operating this year. So this is our budget timeline. We briefed the school board this past Tuesday, and board on the 2nd of February. Usually we get with board members one-on-one prior to that, and I would suspect we'll do the same thing this year. And then on the first Monday in March, it will go to the assembly. And for those who are assembly members, and Star Merced is one of our seasoned board members, every year we've been pretty good at being able to forecast the number of students we were going to have. Next year it's incredibly challenging. We don't know how many are really going to come back from IDA, Raven, Cyberlink, and others. And I think COVID has impacted the world, so I don't feel too bad for not having a perfect crystal ball, but it is going to be a struggle this year, and I'm sure there'll be happy people and disappointed people at the end of our budget process this year. At this time, I'll ask if there are any questions. I'll keep the slides up in case you want me to go back to them.
Thank you. Does want to open the floor up? Does anybody have questions? Looks like Jonathan had a comment, and that was to Andy about the heating costs. He said September, October, November of 2020 were substantially colder than the same months in 2019. So could be a likely driver in energy usage, in addition to not having kids in the buildings to provide their own body heat.
Yeah, thank you for that. I hadn't gone and dug into it a lot as to the reasons why yet until we actually start building our budget. But our preliminary look at it, our usage was up in those first few months.
And we also know that we went from changing the air out in every classroom from 1 time per hour to 4 times per hour. So we know that also had a significant increase in, that certainly would have impacted it. We just don't know how much.
Yeah. That spurs a lot of questions for me, but I want to give everybody a chance. Any questions from our from our commission members? So I'll ask about that one, since you were just talking about the air cycling. I actually was curious if you had opportunities to actually kind of winterize and shut any entire schools down in order to try and save costs, or are people kind of spread out in such a way and unable to do some of the work from home, from offsite, or anything like that you can't have any schools that can be winterized and shut down in any way?
Well, that's a great question. I think as some people may have been tracking, in July, we thought we were going to open in August, October, November. Here we are in December, and we still haven't completely opened any one school, but we do have a lot of programs in a lot of schools. We have tutoring in person happening, and I don't recall as of this week, I know the number has continued to grow, the number of schools. We have staff working at the schools every day. A lot of it is bandwidth issues at home where they still need a place to operate. So we do have some schools that have very limited use, but the schools themselves, even though we've lowered the temperature in many cases, we used to turn on the heat several hours before school opened so everyone would be comfortable as they came in. We've lowered that, but we haven't been able to completely close schools because almost every day we've been delivering additional PPE, new stuff. We have built plastic dividers for all the tables at elementary level, and those are being distributed continuously. I have a driver who worked close to 7 straight weeks in a row without a single day off. That's the level of effort that's still going on throughout the district to try to prepare for opening schools in January.
Thank you very, very much for that response. I do see, Jonathan, you've got your hand up. I've got a question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I mean, first of all, I'd like to pick up where Jim left off, and I'm sorry about that. Pick up where Jim left off, and just say, please, on behalf of this BAC member, thank you to the district staff that are working those extraordinary hours to get kids ready or get the schools ready to be able to accept kids back in them. I think that's really, it's amazing, and it's an untold story at this moment in the pandemic. I do want to ask sort of broader implications. I mean, I know you don't know what the return is next year, but does this potentially trigger renewal of school consolidation discussions to maybe trim an elementary school here or there, or is it are we just way too early for that to even be on the table?
Jonathan, that's a great question. I think you can probably imagine we've already discussed that dozens of times in the last couple months. The challenge, if you look at JBER, we've got Aurora, which is about 36% capacity this year. We had a lot of dual military couples that had no choice but to put their kids in private schools because they can't work from home. They have to go to work, and they still have to perform their mission to include deployments, right? So we know that a lot of them, the fact that they did go to private schools doesn't mean they could really afford it. And a lot of them will probably most likely come back to the district. It's the same for homeschool. Our challenge is we were hoping if we could open in November, show the community, just like every other district in the state that's opened, that we are able to control it and we are able to keep staff and students safe, that after about a month, we could send a survey to everyone who left the district once the community saw that we could pull it off and ask them, do you plan on bringing your children back to ASD next year? But frankly, it doesn't make a lot of sense to send that kind of survey out now when we've been unable to open. So I would suspect that we'll pass a budget. We will get kids back in school. Our board was very supportive this week and really has been for several weeks on us implementing a phased in come back to school. And so I would suspect in the April timeframe, we probably will conduct that survey and try to get a more accurate assessment of who's coming back. And it might require a revised budget or a modified budget, but at this time, it's really difficult. We know how many left, but we haven't had that kind of contact with the parents to know for sure with any certainty how many are coming back. So we're somewhat conservative in our estimate of the number who are coming back. We've heard a lot of comments from families who really don't have the ability to continue homeschooling. So we think quite a few will come back. But there are also going to be families who found out that they loved it and it really fit their family. And so it's really a challenge, Jonathan.
Yeah.
If I can just add something, Jonathan, this is Star Marset School Board. The board is looking at a policy. We don't have a policy currently to look at school boundaries. We are looking at a policy to put that in place. And I think we just need to wait until our numbers stabilize, and we will be doing a boundary survey of our students once we feel comfortable that we know what our student numbers will be in those areas.
Yeah.
Thanks for the additional color.
And this is Andy. I think on top of that also, if we can only claim one hold harmless provision, closing down schools while we're claiming the other hold harmless provision doesn't make, I don't know that we would save much money on that, because we don't have that hold harmless once we close those if we're taking the other hold harmless provision.
Right. Yeah, you may have to wait for one to run out, and then if it's necessary, consolidate schools and trigger the other one.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you,
Jonathan. I think you'll see that next year once we know and we feel comfortable with the population and believe that it's leveled out, that we will, as the board directs us to do every couple of years, we will do a full district-wide assessment on boundary changes and potential closures. But right now, the crystal ball is just gray. We don't have enough confidence in our ability to project that we'd close a school only to find out that transportation costs would increase significantly. The school size in other schools would become larger, so we'd make less per school, per student. I think it'd be an unwise decision this early in the game.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for that discussion. Any other questions for Jim or Andy?
If there's no other questions, I would like to add, just comment on everything. And this is Star Marset.
Question before we pass on. I didn't hear any mention of state school bond debt reimbursement. Has there been what is the assumption there about any bond debt reimbursement?
For the pro forma, one, it's outside the general fund for bond debt. That's a separate fund, so it wasn't included. But for the pro forma, we have to use current state law and not what we believe the governor might present or in the December budget. Frankly, I would be surprised if he doesn't consider shifting more PERS over to local governments and school districts. It is just cost shifting, just like bond debt. I wouldn't be surprised if his going in bottom line is reducing state bond debt assistance again. I think I know Lance and I were talking within hours last year when he first said that he planned on using CARES Act money to cover it. Of course, that wasn't possible, so that didn't happen. But I suspect in the 15 December he probably will say that should go to the local governments. And I know AML has had multiple discussions. The Alaska Municipal League, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, has had multiple discussions about, the local governments also have COVID impacts that are continuing. It's just tough to see that the House is nearly 50-50. The Senate really doesn't have a large majority. It's tough to guess what the legislature, whether they'll agree with him or not this year. I think there will be a lot of people talking to Anchorage caucus members as well as other state legislators this spring to try to prevent that.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And, okay. Star, did you want to go ahead and comment a little further?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, when you're looking at a $38 million deficit, last year we were looking at changing some programs and there was a lot of, kickback on that. But I just want to say, when you're looking at that big of a budget deficit, there are going to be things as a school board that we are going to either have to change programs and how they're presented or how they are changed in a way that will help us save money. So there's going to be budget cuts that not everyone will like. And as I've told the board, we have to rely on our experts, and our experts are the school district. And we're going to try to focus on what our goals and guardrails are. And for whatever money we have, that's exactly where we want to put our focus on. So it's going to be a challenge. And I just want to let people know that we're probably going to have people upset. But anytime you have this type of a budget deficit, we're definitely going to have to do things that won't be popular.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a big gap, and I appreciate your comments on that. Lance, do you want to help us out with Office of Management and Budget update?
Sure. And maybe before we switch topics, thank you, Madam Chair. Andy and Jim and Star, I think for the Budget Advisory Commission, you do have some tough choices ahead of you. And if there's any value or any additional resources that the Budget Advisory Commission can offer, I think, coordinate that with me. Part of their responsibility is not only to general government, where they spend a lot of their time, but this time of the year, they also have a responsibility to advise the school district. And so let's coordinate the timing. Obviously, we'll know a little bit more on December 15th. The crystal ball might get a little bit clearer, at least on the direction. But as far as the outcome, I think this next couple months the BAC can make sure that we have time on our agenda, either through a work session or some other actions to make sure that you get some support from this group as much as they've offered to us general government. So please keep that in mind.
Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
We definitely will.
All right. Okay, so I think the next item on the agenda is an update on the 2020 budget to actuals. So I'll tell you right now that we have a third quarter budget to actuals report going to the Assembly. And so the third quarter was basically July, August, and September. It closed. We had a lot of activity going on at that time right there. So we're sending a report to the Assembly for the third quarter, and I will send it to the Budget Advisory Commission as soon as we're able to do that. But I'll highlight it for the BAC. So at the end of September, we were basically 75% through the fiscal year. We're on a calendar year for our budget. We were 75% through that fiscal year. We're a little behind in our labor postings. This is the timing, but overall, we are underspent. We have only spent about 66% of our total budget. That includes our labor and our non-labor. Our labor is pretty much right on mark. In some places, it might be a little bit over, but our non-labor is really down at this point in time. A lot of that has to do with the timing of the year. And then we have many departments that have costs particularly in their non-labor towards the end of the year. But I also want to point out a couple things that will show up in this report. With the close of MLMP, closed on October 30th. So our fourth quarter report's probably going to have a lot of changes in as it relates to the year end. But in addition to that, the other changes that we made that are going to be seeing at the end of the year is with the CARES Act funds, we were able to apply those CARES Act funds to our first responder payroll, which provided us a little bit of latitude there, but it's also going to reflect in the year-end numbers. Obviously, the pandemic has done some things to our program. We're charging those to a fund, an emergency fund, in anticipation of getting reimbursement from FEMA. In most cases, we were able to do that. And in those cases that we were not, we had departments charge their time if they spent time at the Emergency Operations Center instead of their day job. We found out about 4 weeks ago that those types of activities, even though they were in the Emergency Operations Center, they would not be reimbursable, but their time was already budgeted in their operating budget. So we should be okay in that case there. We will have some departments that really had a big hit in that arena. One of those is going to be the Health Department and Parks and Recreation. So those will be some changes. Obviously, the MLMP sale is going to be a little bit different. The other thing that we know is every year we budget a certain amount of leave cash in. And what that means is there are some individuals who they can only keep so much leave on the books or in a balance. And if for some reason they are not able to take enough leave to keep that balance at a maximum, they can't carry more than that, we are required to cash them out. And we put a budget in there based on a 3-year average of cash out. Well, obviously 2020 is going to be a lot different than that because many people, in fact, were not able to take leave. They did not take vacations. They did not leave. They just continued to work. And so they will then be required to cash in extra leave. It's primarily going to be I think we're going to see some big numbers out of the fire department, but we're going to see numbers probably in every department. That extra amount of cash in leave was not budgeted. And so we're going to keep a close eye out on that. And then overall for general government, while our spend is down, there are a couple departments that we know are already going to be overspent. The fire department will be a little bit, obviously they had some overtime, they had some leave cash in, the police department had additional overtime. Anyway, we know that those departments will probably be looking for a supplemental after the year end closes. But when you look at all of the departments in the city, I do think that we are going to be pretty close to on budget when you net even those that are over. So there's a lot of moving parts in the entire budget process. This third quarter report also includes information from the utilities, with the exception of AWWU, our Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility. Their revenues are pretty close. The water utility their revenue stream is down, and obviously it's for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of less water being used, but that's also reflective of them. But they've also reduced their expenses. So I will send the report out to you, Assemblymember LaFrance. You will see this on the agenda for the 8th, and Again, this one's going to have a little bit more information on it than they normally do, but again, the bottom line is at the end of September, we are underspent, but the fourth quarter and year end is going to have a lot more information on that as well. So other than the two departments I mentioned, I think everyone else is doing relatively well on managing the resources in the budget that they have. So that's good news. If there's questions about departments that you have right now that I can respond to, let me know. And as soon as we get this loaded, I will make sure that Lila makes it available to the BAC members and available online.
Hey, Lance, it's Lindsay through the chair. Just a quick question. When you mentioned the AWU, or is any of that attributed to delinquent accounts?
Yes. And I can get the percentage, but that's exactly what it is. You know, one of the things that the municipality, so we had two things. We had delinquent accounts, and then I think it was at a state level, if not a local level, there was a mandate that we were not going to be turning off utilities. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, if we, I'm not saying that was a bad thing. I'm just saying that the services continue to be provided, the costs continue to be absorbed, if nothing else, by not only AWU, but our electrical utilities, our gas utilities, sometimes our internet providers. The administration has been working with all of those utilities and trying to figure out if we can find out a way to provide some relief to them by assisting either the homeowners or the business owners in some fashion. That way, similar to what we've provided for rent relief. And so I know that we are making progress in that area. Obviously, we'll be using CARES funds if we have any. And I know that at least in this existing pile of money that we had, the $156 million that came to us earlier this year. But if there is a new stimulus coming out, the administration is really looking to see if there's less restrictions on the ability to use those funds for helping businesses, residences, and utilities actually meet their expense needs for purposes of utilities. So, Lindsay, I think there's more to come on that story, but yeah, most of it has to do with people just delinquent on their ability to pay for a variety of reasons.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and you've reminded me, Lila, I think that you saw that. I think Lindsay was able to join us around earlier in the meeting, about an hour ago. So just note for the record.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so, yeah, great question, Lindsay. Thank you. So I think the next monthly report I'll be able to give you will be obviously in January or maybe even February. October is taking a little longer to close, only because it includes all of the final documentation that we have to do for the closure and sale of MLMP. And so our team is making sure that all of those books are finalized, and that's taken a little longer than we thought. And frankly, we expected it to be a little extra time this year. So that's all that I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Lance. Did you have anything you wanted to say about bond preparation?
Yeah. So real quick, we through the capital improvement budget, the first year of the capital improvement budget includes a list of projects that we are proposing for the 21 bond. We are in the process of reviewing that request. One of the additions that the Assembly added to the bond in their amendment process was looking into the implementation and installation of some public restrooms, either in parts of Anchorage. And so we're kind of working with departments, and then we'll work with the sponsors to get a little bit more information. Our plan will be to take those projects that the BAC approved and the one the Assembly added, I'm working with the administration to put our bond package together. Our goal would be to get it, at this point, get it introduced to the Assembly on the 22nd. They're required to have the ballot measures that are going to go on the April bond approved by their second meeting in January, which I believe is the 26th. So we're in that process right now and preparing that bond. I think in your January meeting, I'll be able to share what will be on the bond. There will be some slight tweaks, including the bathroom one. And we got some more information on projects, but 95% of what you saw on the capital budget for 21 is the same.
Okay. Thank you, Lance. Appreciate that. Okay, so we wanted to talk about, start the conversation about our action plan for 2021. And I wanted to open up, Lance, thank you for sending out the email earlier today. I wanted to get people's thoughts on what did you like about what we did last year, what we accomplished last year. And, we did some new things that we maybe hadn't done before, and wanted to get feedback on what you all liked, and then what would you like to do differently or, do in addition. And I think, Lance, you were going to go around and kind of call on everybody so that we could give everyone enough time.
Yeah, I sent out a two question yesterday afternoon, and just to kind of get you thinking, as to the chair had mentioned, I really want to hear from the Budget Advisory Commission on the two questions. What did you like? What are the two things that you liked, or if you have more than that? I kind of want to narrow it down. And what are the things that you want to do differently? And so I'm gonna pick on you in the order that we're there. So and what I'd like to do is I'm gonna ask Alyssa and Jonathan to hold their thoughts, because at the end of the day, you guys are gonna be the ones that are gonna drive this thing. So I don't want the rest of the commission to be influenced by your suggestions. So I'm just gonna pick a name here. So Lindsay, what were the things that, what were the one or two things that you liked most about 2020?
I knew I was going to have to go first. So I liked personally the longer meetings, and I know that we didn't always use the time, but I liked not feeling rushed and being able to, draw out some discussion on items that we might have had to rush over in previous years. And I really did. I enjoyed the virtual format. I think that, everything's had to go virtual, but I think that this has been worked well. I still look forward to returning to in-person meetings, but this was really convenient. And I think that the format and the platform was really well done. And I guess optimistically, what I do different for 2021 is to return to the in-person meetings, but also continuing to incorporate this type of online meeting when, for some of these ad hoc things that come up, or we want to do a last minute meeting, it's easier to schedule around and to create that time in my calendar for it. So it's been great.
Thank you. Those are great suggestions. Thank you. Okay, Carla.
Me? You're supposed to go down. You're supposed to go down.
Yeah, well,
and then
but Lindsay mixed it up for me. Since she said, okay, well, you've already predicting it, I thought, all right, I'm going to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah,
Carla?
okay. Actually, I thought what Lindsay said was really good. Kind of my same thoughts. I think things have worked out this year. I do think the extended, even though it's more time out of our month for meetings, but I do think that's helped. And I'm going to say something that you probably all predict that I'm going to say, but on the other hand, I don't know if it even matters, because we as a BAC can't do anything about this, but I would love to see a more diverse board, and I would love to see a more diverse opinion amongst board members, so that we can have good discussion. We can really back and forth it. And I know sometimes I get the feeling that it doesn't matter what we say, the assembly's going to do what the assembly's going to do. But I do like some of the good discussions that we have back and forth about different parts of what we're reviewing on the budgets and with the departments, and it makes for probably a better solution. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Jimmy, what is on your list? Do I still have Jimmy? Okay, Tasha.
You're smart, hung up.
Okay, Tasha. What did you like? What were some of the things that you liked most about 2020 on the BAC? What are some of the things that you think we could do differently? Better.
Tasha said that she had to step out, but did say that she really liked the department interviews and learning more directly from them and their needs and wish lists.
Thank you, Alyssa. Okay, let's see, who's next? Nolan.
Yeah, thank you. So I had a list of a couple of things here. I think that the things that worked out really well in 2020 that I've really liked were, I'm going to agree with everyone who said the departmental assignments. I think that gave us a lot more depth, beyond just high level detail on departmental budgets. I think that was really good. I really valued also our deep dives that we were able to do on some topics like the alcohol tax, especially where we're able to really dig into a subject, learn a lot about it. And then of course the longer meetings letting us cover things, in greater detail. We didn't feel quite as squeezed. For the coming year, I'm kind of challenged on thinking about that. I think if I have like one regret for 2020, I wish that we had been able to spend more time earlier on recommendations for the CARES Act funding that the Assembly had to develop a framework for. I think we did weigh in on that, but I wish that we had been able to put more time into it at the right stage. For the coming year, I like Lindsay's suggestion also about the idea of like meeting in person, but also when we're able to, but also the idea of expanding into work sessions that might be virtual, and maybe that allowing us to do a bit more. But yeah, those are my comments.
Okay. Did I miss any members other than Alyssa and Jonathan that are still with us? Okay. Alyssa, Jonathan, do you guys want to share your thoughts?
This is Alyssa. Jonathan had to hop off for his next meeting, but I want to say thank you to everybody for your input. A lot of the things that you'd mentioned were some of the things that Jonathan and I had talked about, but we hadn't talked about the virtual meetings and longer meetings. So I really appreciate everybody bringing those things up. I did want to mention, so in terms of, well, first, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We both had a little kind of Nolan appreciation session. So we just wanted to say thank you for the changes that you kind of took the BAC through this last year, including those departmental reviews, the longer meetings, and the work sessions. So we really appreciated the changes that had been made this year. Carla, to your 2 points about having a more diverse board and more diverse opinions, we actually, when we got together and chatted, those were two things that came up there as well. So we are in agreement there, and really do, if you notice, everyone, there's 3 vacant seats. So as we're thinking about people to fill those seats, we really do want to be thinking about how can we, get a better representation of Anchorage and of the various, positions around Anchorage and what issues people care about and things like that. So one of the things that Jonathan and I both were really excited about that had changed this year, and I think we've been working on this over a course, a handful of years, but we really seemed to do a good job this year, was that getting our resolutions out before action had been taken by the Assembly. So Nolan, I appreciate your point on being more in front of CARES Act funding and those sorts of things, but we really did think that we'd done a much better job this year than maybe we had thinking 3-4 years ago. It's kind of a blur. I don't remember how long I've been on the board, but we'd like to keep that up. So that was definitely something that we saw the value in and really wanted to make sure that we maintain that and we can continue to be on top of it. we were interested in continuing the departmental reviews, and I tallied up 3 people who kind of talked about how they appreciated the departmental reviews. We were actually thinking of maybe having people take on a few more as time allows. I know for myself, it didn't take up as much time as I had thought. I was thinking the port's enormous. They've got so much going on. I'm not going to be able to take on more than just that. But as we look around at some of the other departments, I think they're, at least for myself, I don't know if anybody else feels like this, I could potentially take on a few more so that we don't have as many departments who aren't getting any kind of special attention, at the moment. Got to flip back to some of my notes here. If you'll give me just a minute, and if anybody wants to comment while I'm looking at my notes, please feel free.
This is Lance. While Alyssa's catching up, and Carla, to your point, I've had we are looking to fill some vacancies. K12 was not able to continue, so that is why we had the vacancy here. But I think it's important that the Budget Advisory Commission have a broad perspective of views and opinions, as you're considering not only the budgets, but also some of these special work sessions that you have. I think the Assembly appreciates that, and I also think it provides a lot more credibility to the Budget Advisory Commission. The other thing that is going to be unique to 21 is that we're going to be going through a mayoral transition. And in the past, the Budget Advisory Commission has or could play a role in a mayoral transition, and that might be as much as, what do you guys generally think about the budgeting process? Is there differences? There's the things that could be changed. What do you, if there's a transition team and visiting with departments sometime after the election, probably sometime in May, how that role would continue. So I think those are important pieces that the BAC that'll be unique to you in 21, and that wasn't to 20. So I am looking to work with the mayor's office to fill those seats. I have a couple names that I'm looking at that are in the small business. They own small businesses, and so and they're sort of in the private industry side of the house. So I think that's an important piece. And I do think the Assembly listens to what you guys have to say. I don't think that they are, that you are necessarily rubber stamping theirs, and they're not necessarily rubber stamping yours. So I think the more quality time you put into it, the more attention they are paying to it. So I think that is key. As far as a strategy session, we're not going to be able to get together. So what I'd like to be able to do is kind of highlight some of the things that you guys have mentioned here on the things that we should continue to do. I would ask you to consider Alyssa's comment to maybe take on at least 2 departments now that you've had an opportunity to do one. And if you are able to do that, maybe we even started a little bit earlier rather than in the summertime. But I'll put that together. I'll put a calendar together. And rather than having and use this as sort of our framework for our action plan for 21. And as we get new members and we shape this together, I think that's what we'll use, unless Alyssa and Jonathan have a different approach, or if the BAC as a group really doesn't like that approach. So that will be my takeaway, unless guided otherwise.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I did want to mention one other thing as I was checking my notes that Jonathan and I had talked about, and was kind of allowing more time in some of our meetings, whether it's the work sessions or in our regularly scheduled meetings, for kind of a free swim, if you will, for us to bring up, especially as we're having discussions with our different departments, to bring up topics that are of interest of us, that we just want to kind of converse about and brainstorm, whether it's a challenge that a department's having or something of that nature. So I did want to make sure I mentioned that. Thank you for mentioning the transition assistance, Lance. That was the other thing on my list. And then I noticed that Assemblymember LaFrance, you've got your hand up, and then after that, we're going to have a really brief open discussion. We have Hans Thompson here from the public, and so we're really excited to hear what he has to say. So Ms. LaFrance, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that we on the Assembly absolutely listen and very much value your resolutions and your feedback as a group and as individuals. So thank you very much. I can't stress how helpful it is and how much we appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you very much for those kind words. It's nice to hear that that what we're doing is important and matters to all of you in the Assembly. So thank you for sharing. Any other comments before we open it up to public comment? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thanks for taking my time, or your time. And I know that it's been a very stressful year. I know you have a lot of work right now, but I did want to catch you at your monthly meeting to talk about an issue that's, I think, very important. It's kind of a small potatoes issue compared to the millions and millions of dollars that you guys work with, but you know, there is a program within ASD called the School Resource Officer Program, which puts station police officers full-time in schools. And this program started shortly after 9/11, and it was defunded in 2014 from the school district, and now is paid entirely from police officer funds. But there exists a type of, I am not a budget person, so please forgive me for being naive if I am not getting kind of what's going on here. But there is, I think, something like a perverse incentive that goes on where the school district desperately needs more security, and ASD provides this for free. And then in return, the school district provides overtime pay from their operational budget and their school activities budget, which I believe may be more liquid budgets than what they normally work with. Again, not a budget person. I've talked with Jim Anderson, who's been very helpful, and all of ASD has answered all of my questions that they can. But one thing that they have been unable to answer, which I believe this commission can help with, is finding out how much overtime pay goes towards school resource officers. School resource officers accrue overtime pay during extracurricular activities that they provide security for, and for overtime in act of doing work that they would do at school. To me, the answer to this, where overtime pay is being used where normal service is provided and at a higher rate compared to school officers, is to exchange the police officers that are on duty at schools with normal security officers, which was what I had when I was at school at West High School before and after 9/11. Although after 9/11, school resource officers started coming into the school as well. The security officers are much closer to the diversity of the school. But I'm sorry, this is a budget thing. I didn't want to get into that. Really, by exchanging the school resource officers with security officers, we would save money. And then additionally, by allowing officer time to be used for these extracurricular events for the municipality, would mean that they wouldn't necessarily need to use overtime pay. So I believe maybe in a dollars and cents level that isn't as big as SAP or the port or whatever, there's some money that's being misallocated where there could be regular hours accrued for normal duty work at extracurricular events, and where money and officers are serving as the role of security guards where we wouldn't necessarily need that. So I would like to ask the commission to do one or two things, and that is find what are the overtime expenses coming for ABD through school activities from the ASD school activities budget and operational budget. And then secondly, because that's a fixed thing, or it's not a fixed thing, it's, overtime can only come from certain budgets. and APD has probably a limited overtime budget. So if they can get their hands on a different budget through a different organization, that provides them more money. And I don't believe that's good accounting. Even, again, I'm naive. I don't know. So what is that amount? And then secondly, could APD be exchanged for normal security officers within ASD, which would provide more labor for Anchorage Police Department to do more policing, and for schools that have less of a police presence inside them. So I tend to be succinct and maybe leave out information. And I know it was quick, but if anyone had questions, I would take a question, or maybe someone could elaborate that has more information than me.
I want to thank you for bringing up those questions, and for taking the time to go through our entire meeting to, before you were able to bring this up. So thank you for your patience as well. Does anyone have any comments on that? My guess is that this is going to be something that needs some looking into, but I wanted to see if anyone has any questions right off the bat or comments, if anyone can respond.
Madam Chair, this is Lance. I will say that we can look into that. I think if the APD officers are applying overtime for whatever purposes, I'll talk to the chief to see how the school resource officers might be applied there, and I will let you know. And Mr. Thompson, thank you. That's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I think it's knowable. I just don't know it right now.
Okay, thank you, Lance. I put my email in the chat.
Thank you. I'm copying that down.
Alyssa, this is Carla. I'm sorry, I'm on this weird computer, so I can't raise my hand. I just wanted to add to the comment on SROs. The Northeast Community Council actually had requested that SROs in the summertime become park rangers, you might say, or in our parks, since the schools were closed in the summertime.
Yeah.
But APD, which we thought was a great idea because it just kind of transitions them from one thing to the next. But I believe that somebody told us they had some other secondary duty in the summertime. I'm not sure if they still sit on campus during the summers or not, but that was one of the suggestions we made to save a little money, was to better use the money.
Thank you. Thank you. And perhaps this is something we can have a special work session on as well, but I appreciate that. I have to hop off for another meeting. I have a hard stop at 1. So thank you for posting your email there, Hans. As we talk more about this, we'll make sure to keep you up to date. We wanted to make sure we mention our next scheduled meetings: January 7th, February 4th, March 4th. And I hate to cut us short on conversation, but with that, if there are, if I can get a motion to adjourn.
This is Carla, motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Carla. Can we get a second?
This is Nolan, second.
Thank you very much. With that, we are adjourned. Have a great day, everyone. And thank you for your input. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.